It says any person, any man who feels like he's a transgender, he feels like he's a woman, can go in. They don't have to be dressed like a woman. They can be dressed like an ordinary man. And what this creates, Megan, is a great loophole for all the sexual predators and sex offenders.
Yes, a loophole, my friends. That's what it creates, a loophole. Because that's what perverts have been waiting for, loopholes. However, this argument falls flat every single time. Just think about it. We have labeled these people as perverts, as sex offenders, and you think they're waiting for the laws to change? That's what you're thinking? Like guys out there going, man, I want to flash people in the bathroom so badly. When are they going to change the laws? When are they going to change the laws to accommodate me? It falls flat every single time. It falls flat every single time. It falls flat every single time.
John Doyle in. Heck off, Commie.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Heck Off, Commie. There's an article I saw the other day about a woman in prison who claims to have been raped by a transgender inmate, a man who identifies as a woman. And she says that the prison basically did nothing to investigate, that they really didn't even take her story seriously. So now she's filing a lawsuit against them. So with that, and then with the Boy Scouts announcing their bankruptcy, and with the event that we have planned for tomorrow night, I thought that, now would be a pretty good time to talk about the importance of maintaining sex-segregated bathrooms. So we'll talk about the policies that they're proposing, why they're bad, how they pertain to safety, privacy, legal precedent, stuff like that. But first, remember just now when I mentioned the event that we have planned for tomorrow night? Well, here's what's happening. We are doing a live show and interviewing a young woman that was experiencing symptoms of gender dysphoria when she was a much younger woman. She was then pressured into transitioning by counselors and doctors, and it wasn't until after she had actually started that process that she realized that it was wrong and that she wanted to live as her biological sex. And so this is going to be an extremely important conversation because the left refuses to believe that there's any treatment for gender dysphoria except for cross-sex hormones and sex change operations, even though the data strongly suggests that doesn't solve the underlying psychological problems or help the person in the long run. So we're here to give this young woman a platform to share her story. We're going to be respectful, and we're all going to learn something, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be really interesting. So as of right now, it's going to be live streamed at heckoffcommie.com tomorrow night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time for members only. So if you are already a member, you're good to go. Your IQ is high. I mean, these people are incredible. Big shout out to Jake. Big shout out to Zach. Big shout out to Chad. The guy's name is literally Chad. Like, his IQ easily north of 200. So just keep in mind, if it weren't for people like that, none of this would be possible, because the reason YouTube demonetizes conservative videos is because they know that there's a lot of time and money that goes into making them. So if they can drain you financially, then eventually you're going to be forced to quit because, you have to eat, right? So I really appreciate everyone that signed up. And because of that, and because this interview is so important, I'm probably just going to do it live on YouTube at the same time tomorrow night for everybody to see. But let's pretend that I'm not, so we can get more people signed up. So officially, the live show is tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time for members only. So if you want to watch it, you have to be a member at heckoffcommie.com. But off the record, it's an important interview for the public to see. So it's probably very likely, almost guaranteed, to definitely be live tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. right here on YouTube. But I can't confirm any sensitive details at this time. But anyways, yeah, I came across that clip of Trevor Noah arrogantly arguing against the opposition to letting men use women's restrooms. And at first I was hesitant to use the clip since it's so old. But the thing is that what he's saying there, and we'll go through it again, is exactly what is still being said today by these activists. And Trevor Noah himself has made the time list of the 100 most influential people. So these ideas that he's spreading are far from obscure and outdated. So we'll go through the whole thing now.
But let's move on to a story that's been particularly divisive over the past few weeks: the rights of transgender people. Now, with more and more states threatening to introduce restrictive bathroom bills, it was only a matter of time before the president stepped in.
The Obama administration has sent out a directive to every public school in the country to allow transgender students to use the bathrooms that match their gender identity.
Or face the threat of lawsuits and possible loss of federal funds for the states in which they live.
Some states are pushing back, including Texas.
When you pass these ordinances and these rules, particularly in the adult sector, it says any person, any man who feels like he's a transgender, he feels like he's a woman, can go in. They don't have to be dressed like a woman. They can be dressed like an ordinary man. And what this creates, Megan, is a great loophole for all the sexual predators and sex offenders.
Yes, a loophole, my friends. That's what it creates, a loophole. Because that's what perverts have been waiting for, loopholes. However, this argument falls flat every single time. Just think about it. We have labeled these people as perverts, as sex offenders, and you think they're waiting for the laws to change? That's what you're thinking? Like guys out there going, man, I want to flash people in the bathroom so badly. When are they going to change the laws? When are they going to change the laws to accommodate me? It falls flat every single time.
So firstly, it's important to note that in what I presume was meant to be like his impartial summary of the issue before the clip started playing, he described the issue of transgender rights. And the broader message of that, which we'll get more into in a second, is that there are rights of which transgender people are deprived in this country. And one of the biggest things that they've done to combat this supposed oppression is that they've tried to redefine sex to mean gender identity within Title IX. And Title IX is, of course, federal law, which states that you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex in public schools or any school taking federal dollars to exclude people from participation. That's something that would affect your kids in their schools, and we'll get more into that in a second. But for now, what I'm saying to you is this. There are no rights in this country of which transgender people are deprived. What they're doing is the same thing that every political interest group in this country has done. Whether it's the feminists, the gays, illegal aliens, transgenders, literally all of these people have co-opted the language of the civil rights movement in order to forward their own agenda that has nothing to do with actual oppression. And I'm gonna play the clip from the last time I explained this because that video was epic. The second wave feminists were very smart in that they employed the momentum and vocabulary used by the civil rights movement in their own pursuit of feminist equality. Betty Friedan declared in her impactful 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, that what they needed was a political movement, a social movement like that of the blacks. Gloria Steinem, another prominent second wave feminist, authored a piece in 1969 for New York Magazine titled After Black Power, Women's Liberation. It has become fashionable for various interest groups to co-opt the vocabulary and moral standing of the civil rights movement. Women, Latinos, homosexuals, transgenders, undocumented aliens, all of these groups seek to compare their situations with the historical situations faced by Black Americans by existing under this umbrella of historical American oppression that is fueled almost exclusively by how blacks were treated in this country. This strategy has allowed for the universalization of rights. Once a group can insert themselves into the Trojan horse of American oppression that's painted with the blood of Black Americans, they can doctor their agenda as nothing more than fighting for equal rights when in fact there are no rights of which they are deprived. Wow, that was a well put together video, if I do say so myself. But yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing happen with these various groups. And I also like how he made the joke about how, well, the criminals aren't going to follow the laws, so what's the point of having the laws? Because that is a train of thought that I am sure he has never had within the context of gun rights. Like, you make it harder to legally obtain guns, criminals don't care. Now you have fewer law-abiding citizens able to protect themselves. But if we uphold the idea that men and women should use separate bathrooms, that doesn't matter because sex offenders don't care. And he has a point. It's misguided. You know, like, it's true that you can find many cases of men going into women's locker rooms, bathrooms, etc., and sexually assaulting them or harassing them. But when you change the rules so that anyone can use any bathroom so long as they claim to identify with the gender for which the facility is designated, now you've removed something extremely important for punishing sex offenders, which is intent. When you prosecute certain sex crimes, your success is dependent on whether or not you can establish intent. If men have the legal right to be in women's restrooms, it's going to be much harder to prove that they had criminal intent. Whereas before, if a man were in a woman's restroom and he acted inappropriately, he'd be much more likely to be punished for that because it's pretty hard to convince the legal system that you accidentally went into the women's restroom and then you accidentally committed sex crimes in the women's restroom, which again, you were only accidentally occupying in the first place, right? Like, one of the reasons that we have sex-segregated facilities, and probably the most important one, is to protect women and girls from male predators. No one thinks that the big problem with this is that transgender people are gonna start behaving inappropriately in these facilities. No. The problem with this is that predators will be able to abuse gender identity policies in order to gain easier access to victims. Public restrooms have long been known as areas in which offenders seek out victims in a planned and deliberate way. That was true long before people started questioning their pronouns out of a mixture of mental illness, boredom, and childhood trauma. So now what these new policies actually do is create more safety risks for women and young girls. And if you don't think that predators are going to exploit this, you're just dangerously ignorant. You're irresponsibly stupid. Please stop voting. There's a really interesting book. It's now in its 5th edition, I believe. It's called Child Molesters, a behavioral analysis. It's written by this guy who's consulted on thousands of different sex crimes. And basically, everyone who works around these types of people know that they will definitely exploit anything that they can to gain easier access to victims. And it's like, okay, so now they have this as a cover. How are we supposed to prove that actions weren't just misinterpreted, right? Like a guy exposes himself to a woman in the bathroom. Oh, well, maybe it was just an accident. Maybe he's transgender, right? What about a guy's eyes wandering in the women's locker room? Well, maybe he's just looking for something. Maybe he's just transgender, right? Like back then, it was, you don't go into the women's locker room unless you're a woman. So now you've got a guy in there. Women are saying that he's watching them undress. Pretty obvious that this guy is just a pervert, right? Well, now there's no objective standard of who gets access to facilities. So now you can't prove intent as easily, which means that law enforcement is going to hold back from pursuing these cases, not only because they're more difficult to pursue now, but one wrong move and you're going to have discrimination lawsuits on your desk. You'll have the ACLU and the HRC calling for your resignation. You'll have every leftist publication in the country libeling you. It's very risky business now. All someone has to do is claim they're a woman, and that's what they are. No corroboration required, nothing. All that matters is their identity. And this is coming from the left, who talks about rape culture and about how women are afraid to report their cases. Okay, what about now? What about the fear of being labeled a transphobe? What about the fear of being accused of discrimination? Now women are going to have to think to themselves, well, was he transgender? Was it just an accident? Because we've abolished gender for some reason. And as a result, women and children will be more vulnerable. Oh, well, but that never happens. It actually happens quite often. I mean, I put a few articles, for example, at the beginning of the video, but you've got guys going into women's shelters and sexually assaulting deaf women and domestic violence victims after preying on other women as young as 5. You've got guys going into women's locker rooms and stripping down in front of young girls. And when they're asked to leave, they say, and I quote, "The law has changed. I have a right to be here." I mean, it's so messed up. There's been over 130 of these instances in recent years, but where's the media? What are they covering? Whether or not Trump's gonna make it a few days without eating meatloaf? Thanks, you guys are the real heroes. But yeah, back to Trevor.
And then if they're not talking about perverts, then other people say, oh, it's about privacy. Privacy.
That's where there's an expectation of privacy. When you go into a restroom or your wife goes into a restroom, you assume the only other people going to that restroom or shower facility is going to be a person of the same gender. That's been an expectation of privacy that all of us have had
if there's
for years.
No problem.
And you know what? I understand that. Privacy. We all expect a certain level of privacy. And I've chatted to some of my friends who are parents of young girls, and they go, hey, I don't know if I'd be comfortable with my daughter being in the same bathroom as an exposed penis. And I understand that. It's not like I don't understand that completely, because I'm not comfortable being in the bathroom with an exposed penis. And I'm a man. This is something that nobody's comfortable. No one likes being around a penis that they didn't plan to see. This is something we all agreed on. And in life, there are certain types of privacy we forego. It's one of the deals we make to be part of society. That's what we do. When I go to the gym, I have to accept the fact that in the change room, there may be a man standing there blow-drying his balls. I don't want to see that. Nobody wants to see that. You do understand that the transgender population in America is closer to 0%. 0% of the population than 1%. Closer to 0, it's 0.3% of the population is transgender, right? So the chance of you bumping into a transgender person in the bathroom is almost 0%. But the chance of a transgender person needing the bathroom is 100%. They're already dealing with their own shit. Now you're giving them yours. I don't understand. It's so absurd. We're saying this in society. We're like, oh no, this is disgusting. This is something that we have to deal with. I'm not comfortable. We're not comfortable with many things in society, but we've learned to get over it. It's what we do.
Something that these people like to do when addressing a valid concern is just to make a joke about it that causes all the low IQ people to just dismiss it like, oh yeah, I also would prefer not to see penises if given the choice. So I guess my experience as an adult man who has a penis not wanting to see additional penises is just like a young girl who's never seen a penis before in her life, because prematurely sexualizing children is extremely harmful and evil. Thanks, Trevor Noah. Like, I love that. I love pretending that the experience of an adult man is comparable to the experience of a young girl. I love how he just laughs it off without actually addressing the problem, which, by the way, they have no answer for. So sorry, moms and dads, your daughter is going to be exposed to it, and she's just going to have to be tolerant and accepting of girls with penises. And with the idea of like, oh, well, we sacrifice privacy to live in a society. That's what we do. Like, okay, yeah, technically, when I'm in public, I'm sacrificing my privacy. But our society that you mentioned has always understood the importance of separating men and women in intimate facilities. For example, in 1996, when the Supreme Court ruled that the Virginia Military Institute would have to become coeducational, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the darlings of the left, wrote that this change would, quote, undoubtedly require alterations necessary to afford members of each sex privacy from the other sex in living arrangements. And she even wrote the same thing back in 1974. When defending the Equal Rights Amendment, she wrote that separate places to disrobe, sleep, perform personal bodily functions are permitted and in some situations required by regard for individual privacy. Our courts have affirmed this many times in a variety of settings. For example, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that prisoners have a right not to be seen in a state of undress by guards of the opposite sex unless there is an emergency, and they based that ruling on, quote, society's undisputed approval of separate public restrooms for men and women based on privacy concerns. So privacy is important for prisoners, but not for our kids in school. The letter that was written from the Obama administration to every public school in the country stated that they may not even notify students or their parents about whether they will have to share a bedroom, shower, or locker room with a student of the opposite sex. And the reason for that is that the privacy of the transgender student is paramount, and everyone else's privacy is irrelevant. This is ridiculous. Do you know how traumatizing it can be for young women to be exposed to men like this? Do you know how triggering it can be to victims of sexual assault? And no, I don't mean triggering like, oh, well, I had to hear something today that I disagreed with, so I'm going to scream about it because I have a poor relationship with my father. No, I mean like seriously triggering to these people. It makes them incredibly anxious. It makes them incredibly distressed. And the idea that they would have to endure that simply because someone is misaligned with the reality of their biological sex is just absolutely insane. And they refuse to have anything but. I mean, compromises were offered to these activists of gender-neutral facilities that transgender people could use, but these compromises were shut down. They don't want to have privacy in their own facility. They want to use your daughter's facility, and if you don't like that, you're actually invading their privacy by getting involved with their gender identity. That's why it's total BS when he says trans people are such a small percentage of the population, but they all have to go to the bathroom. Like, okay, so explain to me then why such a small percentage of the population can't just use a separate facility instead of forcing everybody else to conform to their delusion and pretend that it's normal. Women, this is why you need to stop voting for the left. They don't actually care about you. 1 minute it's all, yay, the future is female, but then not long after it's them telling you which men have a right to share a bedroom or shower with you, and if you protest, you're intolerant and you're invading their privacy. And I love how he finishes it talking about, you know, we're a society, sometimes things are uncomfortable, but we get used to them. That's how we progress. Like, I love when they say that. There's this idea on the left that we're always progressing. Everything that we do is always progress, and everything that we used to do was bad. That's stupid for a few reasons. Firstly, it assumes that the history of society is always like moving forward towards something which they would subjectively define as better, whereas in actuality, there are fluctuations of good trends and bad trends, not only in our society, but in every society in the history of the world. You think that we're the first society to decide that sex and gender can be separate and that biological sex doesn't matter? We're not. It's been tried. Where are those societies now? Gone. Separate video, but you get the point. It's like there's nothing original about this. Throughout the history of the world, there are bad ideas, good ideas, they've all fluctuated in prevalence. There's basically nothing new here. And the second part is that the mindset of assuming that all ideas from the past are inherently outdated and incorrect provides a pessimistic framework for the precision of your own ideas, because to assert that ideas from the past are incorrect simply because they're outdated is to then implicitly predict that a generation or two from now, people will regard your ideas in the same way. Ideas can be good or bad, like timeline is effectively irrelevant. And they want to enforce these bad ideas on your family. Like, that was another thing he said. He alluded to discrimination against blacks on the basis of race. Like, gender identity has absolutely nothing to do with race or even biological sex, because race and biological sex are objectively determined, and gender identity is entirely subjective. John Doyle admits that gender identity is separate from biological sex. I mean, technically, yes, but it just so happens that like 99.9% of the time, people identify with their biological sex. So your job is to explain to me why sometimes people don't, in a way that disproves the environmental and developmental factors that suggest it's a disorder, basically. Like they want to include gender identity into our anti-discrimination laws so that everyone will have to comply. They'll have to allow access to facilities and all that stuff. And it's like, practically speaking, that makes absolutely no sense. Like the reason that we legally prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, for example, is that in the history of our country, blacks were heavily discriminated against. Like when the Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1964, black Americans were treated as second-class citizens. They were excluded by individuals, businesses, various associations, and that was all with the explicit backing of the government. It was the whole point of the policies. That's why we had to enact illegal remediation. The situation of transgender people in America at its worst is still not even remotely comparable to the situation of blacks in America under Jim Crow at its best. There was nothing designed to segregate them from other people because of their gender identity. There was nothing to make them a second-class citizen. There was no denial of the right to vote. There are no labeled water fountains. Oh, well, but the bathrooms are labeled. Shut the hell up. That is not discrimination. We're not saying don't go into the women's room because you're transgender. We are saying don't go into the women's room because you have a dick, dude. Like, come on, man. And ironically, the actual discrimination against gender identity would occur through the laws which they're trying to enact. Because right now, our bathrooms and facilities discriminate on the basis of sex. If you're a boy, don't go into the girls' room. If you're a girl, don't go into the boys' room. They say that discriminates against gender identity because people who identify as girls can't go into the girls' room. They can't go in there not because they think they're a girl. Who cares about that? They can't go in there because of the fact that they are not a girl. Whereas in these laws, where it would be up to gender identity, a biological man can use the man's bathroom or the men's bathroom as long as he identifies as a man. But if he identifies as a woman, then he can't, because the law would be updated to discriminate against gender identity instead of sex. So ironically, the law itself creates the actual discrimination against gender identity. And to this you might say, well, it's not really going to affect him because he's going to want to use the bathroom that aligns with his gender identity. But the point is that the scale has shifted from protecting the normal students who identify with their biological sex to only protecting students who don't, and subjecting the others to literal discrimination. The only students that would be discriminated against under that rule would be students who identified with their biological sex. It's completely and utterly misguided. Hey guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, leave it a comment, subscribe to the channel. You know the drill. By now, I would hope. But if you're new, those are 3 things to consider. Also, looking forward to the event tomorrow. We'll see you there. It's going to be very epic, very enlightened. And I think we're all going to learn something. We're all going to have a great time. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. May God bless America.